The sun was on its full face, the earth was burning like copper from the heat of the sun. The streets of the city of Wasit were deserted, and the air was dry. Shadows of fear were spread on every door and wall because the rule here was in the hands of Hajjaj bin Yusuf, a ruler who was notorious for his cruelty and harshness. It was not easy to seek justice in Hajjaj's court. His decisions were sharper than his sword, and feelings like mercy were rarely seen in his heart. But that day, something happened in the court that silenced even Hajjaj for a moment. A thin and gaunt woman, whose face bore clear signs of poverty and exhaustion, entered the court barefoot.
Like, share, comment, and subscribe.
There was a strange sparkle in her eyes, as if she did not believe in any fear. She had nothing valuable in her hand, only the weapon of truth and a hope in her heart. People looked at her in surprise. Some laughed, some whispered, "How dare she come before Hajjaj?" But the woman stood before Hajjaj without hesitation and spoke in a loud voice. "Oh, Hajjaj, my husband is innocent, yet he is rotting in your prison. I am weak, but my truth is powerful. If there is justice left in your court, then release my husband, otherwise fear the justice of Allah." Silence fell in the court. Hajjaj looked at the woman from his chair for a moment. There were signs of severity on her face, but for a moment a glimmer of surprise appeared in her eyes. Perhaps it was the first time he had heard someone speak so boldly. After a few moments of silence, Hajjaj asked in a very stern tone, "Who is your husband? And do you think your truth is more powerful than my sword?" The woman replied without looking down, "My husband is an ordinary man, but in the court of Allah neither your throne nor your sword will prevail. Only truth will reign there." A strange calmness replaced the severity on Hajjaj's face. He took a deep breath and ordered his guards. Her husband should be released immediately. There was an uproar in the court, but Hajjaj said only this in a cold tone, "This woman reminded me that there is no justice greater than Allah's justice." This incident became an example during Hajjaj's reign that sometimes the greatest power is a seemingly weak truth. When Hajjaj bin Yusuf ordered the release of the woman's husband, everyone in the court was astonished. This was the same Hajjaj whose orders had made people tremble. But today, the truthfulness and courage of an ordinary woman had challenged his pride. Hajjaj looked at the woman carefully, as if he were trying to read the story written on her face. Then he said in a low voice, "Tell me, for what crime is your husband imprisoned?" The woman straightened her dirty cloak and answered in a clear tone, "My husband, Yasir, is a labourer. He was falsely accused of stealing government grain, but the truth is that he never committed such a crime. He was earning a living for his children." Hajjaj looked at his courtiers, who were looking at each other in panic. He knew that there were many people in his court who were blinded by the intoxication of power and did not hesitate to oppress the innocent. In a short time, Yasir was presented to the court. He was a weak and emaciated man, with signs of fatigue and pain clearly visible on his face. His hands were chained, but there was a faint glimmer of hope in his eyes when he saw his wife. Hajjaj asked in a stern tone, "Have you stolen?" Yasir replied very calmly, "No, I did not steal. I only earn a lawful livelihood for my children, but the lies of the powerful made me a criminal." Hajjaj remained silent. Then he ordered that Yasir be released and that those who falsely accused him be investigated. The faces of many courtiers in the court became pale. When Yasir was freed from his chains, his wife said with tears in her eyes, "See, Yasir? Truth never gives up, no matter how great the power in front of him." Hajjaj watched them both leave, and for a moment his heart was stirred. Perhaps for the first time, the question arose in his heart, "Is my justice truly justice or just a shadow of fear?" But the story does not end here, because this question that arose in Hajjaj's heart gradually began to change his behavior and his decisions. That night was unusual for Hajjaj. He walked on the marble floor of his magnificent palace, where everything testified to his authority. But today there was an uneasiness in his heart, a restlessness which he had never faced before. Hajjaj returned to his past, when he was an ordinary man, not hungry for power but only thirsty for knowledge. But when he sat on the throne, power hardened his heart. Today, the words of Yasir's wife knocked on that hardened heart for the first time. The next morning, Hajjaj called the court, but today his gaze was not as hard. The courtiers were looking at his changed eyes with surprise. "There should be justice in my court, not fear." Saying this, he ordered his guards to investigate those who falsely accused Yasir. During the investigation, it was revealed that the accuser of Yasir was an influential courtier who had misused his power. Hajjaj ordered him to be presented to the court. "You oppressed an innocent person in the intoxication of your power. Did you not fear the justice of Allah?" Hearing this question from Hajjaj, the courtier began to tremble. For the first time, Hajjaj raised his sword in the name of justice. But this sword was no longer just to spread fear, but to establish justice. He punished the courtier and declared, "This throne is mine, but justice belongs only to Allah." Over time, Hajjaj's decisions began to change. He became harsh against the oppressors and soft towards the oppressed. People were surprised that how could this change happen in the heart of a tyrannical ruler? But the truth was that the truth of an ordinary woman had cracked the walls of his heart. Hajjaj often looked up at the sky at night and thought, "Power does not last forever, but the echo of justice remains." Time passed, but the truth of Yasir and his brave wife left an imprint on Hajjaj bin Yusuf's heart that could never be erased. He had now become a ruler who made decisions not only on the basis of fear, but in the light of justice. Those who spoke the truth in his court no longer feared, for they knew that the courage of even an ordinary woman had changed Hajjaj's heart. Yasir and his wife returned to their home, where they began to live in peace and dignity. Examples of their courage and truth began to be given, and Hajjaj remembered until his last breath the day when a weak woman had taught him that real power lies not in the sword, but in truth and justice. Tell us in the comment box how you liked this story.